Welcome everyone to the Helm developer call for December 2nd, 2021. We're near the end of this year. We'll go ahead and get started with announcements and then into discussion. And so the very first thing I'll kick it off with is the announcements. And the only announcement that we have is one I assume, Bridget, you put it on there for me to talk about, is the upcoming Helm 3.7.2 release that goes out on scheduled for December 8th. That's next Wednesday. And we have material in it, so it will be going out the door. So no, that's our second Wednesday of every month is when we try to target for either a minor version release or a patch version release, and we'll have one. So you've been warned. Is there any other announcements that anybody has?
I actually have a question. Is today the last day, or what's the last day somebody could try to add something to that milestone, hoping it gets reviewed, hoping it makes it into that patch release?
I would suggest if you want it to be reviewed and try to get it in by the end of this week. But even before we release it, we'll give it one last review. Right. So that Wednesday morning, I'll probably be the one to cut the release, and I will come in, I'll give it a review and see, is there anything else that needs to go in? If not, we'll schedule it for the next release if it's something we can't get to. But if it's small, it can get in. But I'd say if it's anything consequential, and it has to be a bug because it's a patch release, can't be a feature, try to get it in by the end of this week. And that's it. Are there any other announcements? No. All right. So the next thing, since Josh isn't here, I'll move his thing down a little bit later in case he does come. So move things around. In that case, Bridget, you have something here.
Yeah,
of our schedule for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I was just realizing December is upon us, horrifyingly. Also, it's 2021. I don't know if anyone knew that, but you have another month to be horrified by the fact it's 2021 before it's an even later year. But since I was arranging all of my meetings for my very few remaining work days of the year, I thought maybe this would be a good time to take the temperature of the room and see roll call for the days, at least I know Karina and I will not be around. Is anybody going to run the meeting on those days? Yeah, go ahead for it.
All right. So I would suggest that I see there are some people who are at the 23rd and the 30th meetings. Normally, as we come right around to this holiday season, we cancel meetings. And so the 30th, I think is a no-brainer to cancel. I won't be available. Most people probably won't be available. And if they were, they probably won't have much to talk about. So are we good with canceling? We'll start with the 30th. Does anybody see any issues with that? Great, we're canceling that. December 23rd is a normal work week for a lot of people, but there's still a lot of people who take it off. I can't remember whether we've canceled it in the past or whether we've kept it on, and I'm not going to go back and look. Given the number of people who will probably be out, is this something that we're good canceling? I don't know that we'll have much to talk about that week either. Does anybody see an issue with canceling that one as well, with probably many people out?
I have a note saying it's a holiday for like, I think some company holidays, if they give you 2 days because Christmas Day is on a Saturday, they give you either Thursday or Monday. And I think Monday is not the day. I think Thursday is the day for our employers. So I think some people perforce will not be working that day regardless.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go ahead and cancel it just to be on the safe side. I might be there, but I wouldn't have anything to talk about likely. So we can go ahead and cancel that one. And then there's December 9th. Oh, did somebody have something?
Say, while I will be back, a number of people on my team are also out the week following New Year's. So that one might be more important than canceling the one 2 weeks from now. If people want to, I will be here, and it would be perfectly happy to do this meeting then.
I think we might want to keep it because we're about to cut a minor release right around that time. And so we may want to leave it open just to discuss the minor release. Even if some people are out, I know I'll be back and we got that whole minor release thing coming. We should have a meeting before we cut that or two. And then the 9th and 16th normal. Does that sound good? All right. Great. All right, Bridget, are we good with your topic now?
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Josh, are you the Josh who joined who has this item around OCI?
Hello, hi.
Josh, great to see you.
Great to see you. I think I was supposed to be notes, so I'm sorry I was late.
That's okay. We got it covered now unless you want to take it over. But since this is
Okay.
your topic, I will cede the floor to you to discuss it.
Great. So, okay, so we met with myself, Scott, and Matt Farina to talk about getting OCI out of experimental for real. And we came up with like a short list of items. Scott had posted that on GitHub. Matt Fisher had kind of brought to light a bunch of issues that have gone unresolved. Some of them are due to lack of people working on them, and some of them are just due to like missing features in OCI or some combination of that. We're unclear on how to approach certain situations that apply to Helm repos, like think about something like Helm search. So there's an issue out there. So it's unclear if we will be able to ship in 3.8, even though there's been a lot of talk about that, and Scott has really been trying to make that happen. I'm personally for it, but if people don't feel comfortable, I'm wondering if it makes sense to take all the OCI stuff and put it into another Helm project that has a public API, so that, you know, like companies like Weave who are doing sort of more SDK level work can not be blocked on this while we figure out the user experience in the CLI. I also don't want to like go backwards on the progress we've made, so I wanted to bring it up for discussion.
Okay, so if I understand it right, there were a handful of things that we had originally talked about, such as dealing with the build suffix and how OCI doesn't deal with pluses, moving the package out, Docker config, some things like that. There were a handful of things we needed to still cover. But what I know I personally wasn't aware of is that some of these other things with dependency management were supported. I thought all these were done already, right? For example, I thought the ability to deal with version ranges was done because we totally have the capability of doing that. The OCI APIs are there. It just needs to be implemented, right? The business logic needs to be implemented to use those APIs in order to figure things out, right? Like if you say, give me something between this range and this range, you can get the tags, look at the tags that are semver, and then you can say, okay, which tag fits that? Now that's the one to use. That can all be done, right? It's just a matter of using the APIs. I thought this work had actually been done already. So I'm sorry to say this was my fault for not realizing what had been implemented and what hadn't. But it does bring up that there are still a number of issues here. And outside of the technical, you brought up one of them is bodies working on this, right? Because we've got these issues and they're not done because bodies are not just actively picking away at them. And yet for a robust solution, there's a bunch of folks who think that we need all these things there. So that way we have this, right? So when somebody puts in OCI, you know, here's my version that I want, and they put in a version range and it breaks and we get supports and we get all these calls for it. Do we say that this just isn't implemented yet, even though it's out the door? Or do we say it shouldn't be, you know, or we say we should block on it and not having the feature? It's a feature that we would expect in other things usually going in to this kind of thing. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated And yeah, while we don't have many developers, how do we build more developers working on this if things are currently stalled? And so, Josh, what's your thinking on this? Because I think we need all of these features here. And if they're not being worked on now, they need to be worked on, whether or not it's released as a, we remove the experimental flag in 3.8 or not. They still
Right.
have to start being actively worked. How do we get to that situation? Let me ask, where these are being actively worked. And let's just set aside the 3.8 feature for a minute, because even if it goes out in 3.8, by 3.9, we'd expect more of these features in. How do we get to the point where more of them are being actively developed on a regular basis?
But I think that he's doing a phenomenal job of trying to add some project management to this. I have definitely, I don't want to blame myself, but maybe we could have been more organized about this and had this checklist of these are the things versus Matt Fisher having to bring it up in this issue queue. Like, we should have these set of requirements. I'm a little biased. I don't think that we need to have all of those to get out of experimental. I think we can solve that by putting a warning somewhere like, hey, you're not going to have parity with repos. The people who are using this seem like they know what they're getting into and wanting to have this for specific reasons. So I think I think what you're saying is actually a matter of opinion.
But
I think
hold on, Josh.
disagree on it.
So Josh, I see we're focusing on some of these features here, but some of them are things I think we're gonna need to have, right? And so I'm asking not about whether they should be in 3.8 or the opinions, but how do we get to an active development of them as we move forward? So not in the past, like from here on out, moving forward, how do we get more active, regular development on these things so that bugs are fixed here? Some of these features do end up being implemented, right? And so like version ranges, when we go out of the experimental, it now becomes general purpose, which opens it up to a different audience. And then there are different expectations from the people you have today. And so how do we just get into that cadence of development on it? That's kind of my question first.
Honestly, I don't think that, like, we have help from, like, Scott has gotten Weave to sort of commit to some of this. I'm happy to continue helping. There's other people who are super excited about this. I think we don't have the clear requirements. I think if we put together a document, these are what we need to do, and this is how you do it, we will have people jump at these issues. And then on top of it, getting them reviewed is the other time thing that will take a long time. But I think that we can, oh, my computer's dying. We can I think we can get people to work on it without having to invest dollar bills, probably, if we can just agree on what is that list.
Well, I mean, part of the list is it's going to be changing over time as more things come in, but getting that first kickoff list makes sense. And so you're suggesting we create some kind of document or an issue that contains those as checkboxes, and then we figure out how to encourage people to start attacking those. Because I think right now, if we had somebody here or a couple of people are willing to look at the pull requests and issues as they come in, and then maybe file them or the pull requests into when a pull request comes in connected to an issue into a release, it's fairly easy to get people to review things once they're organized into a release. It's having somebody who will sit down, look at a pull request and say, this makes sense, it's in decent shape, let's get this into a release. That's where we get the hard part. So we need some active maintainers on OCI to get rolling on that and bringing those in as the pull requests come in. But we need pull requests to get there. So you think if we get the document, then we can start get that ball rolling, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad. There's people who are trying to fix this without the requirements, and we don't even know how to review it because we haven't talked about it.
Well, I mean, if somebody came in and brought in a pull request because there's an issue for Alias support, and they brought in a pull request for Alias support, then that'd be pretty easy to jump on, to test, and to review, right?
I don't think it's as simple as you're describing it. I think because every time someone brings a PR, it's like, well, we haven't thought about this. Well, we haven't thought about this. So it's not as easy as you're describing it. I think we need to be very clear what we're going to support, what we're not going to support, the exact UX of it. Otherwise, it will be stalled in review, which we've seen happen.
You mean for an individual pull request? So if I say something like alias support, right, for OCI features, I don't know that we'd ever say we're not going to support it, so it's not going to go in. It would be a matter of the
But
technical details.
that means absolutely nothing to me, and I don't know what that looks like.
What do you mean it means
So,
nothing to you?
Not that the feature is not meaningful to me. That saying alias support for OCI is like they're not the same, because alias are used in this whole other subsystem. So what does it mean to add aliases for OCI? Like, I know what you're getting at, but it's complex in terms of like these very small specifics, like the namespace, and it's not as clear as you're saying. So I think it's better to get something out the door and put a bunch of warnings everywhere, like this is still kind of experimental, or not experimental, but like you're not going to get what you got in a Helm.
So it's
2
different features.
repo.
Okay.
I think
So
so.
we probably need to go through the list of things here and say, what's a must-have, what can go for the future, that kind of thing, and figure out if there's anything blocking or what is standing in the way of going out into 3.8, because there's those 4 things that you even got listed so far that we talked about for 3.8 that aren't done, right? So it would be, are there additional things in addition to those that need to be added to that list, and what doesn't, right?
Yes, and
okay.
Yes, I'm gonna grab my cord. I'm still listening.
Go ahead, go grab your cord. All right, so I dropped the link in, by the way, for the chat, or into the chat here. Does anybody else, Mark or Butcher, or anybody else here, Joe or whoever here, or Bridget, sorry, you had your hand raised. I'm sorry I missed that. You are so polite, and I've been poor at that. What do you have to say, Bridget?
I just wanted to make sure we make a distinction between we must have this to remove the experimental flag for 3.8, and this would be nice. I feel like those two are both kind of mixed together in that issue in 10393. So that's all I wanted to highlight, that it would be nice if we can get the experimental flag off and then move on with our lives with adding all of the wish list items.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'd take it a step
I
farther.
also agree with Bridget.
I'd take it a step farther and make a distinction between sufficient API and feature complete. If there's sufficient API that developers can develop against it and have the assurance that it's not going to break, that would be ready to come out of experimental, even if it doesn't have all the additional features that you would expect from non-OCI.
It's still a flag, right? Like people can choose to use it or not. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, people can choose to use it or not. And part of this is when you move it from remove it from experimental, we're going to get other people using it in different ways with different expectations, and the support burden is going to change, right? So let's do this real quick. Let's figure out who's got stuff for the next week, and then let's jump back to the short list we have here and see if we got an obvious answer pretty quickly. So for the next week, I am willing to take issue triage. Do we have anybody for moderator or notes?
I'll do either, whichever one people don't have someone for.
Who wants to moderate?
I can moderate.
You'll moderate?
Oh, Dr. Butcher said he could do.
But we also get volunteers for the 16th while we're at it.
There you go.
I did one like last week, so I can wait and do one on the 16th or something like that, because I'm pretty much positive I'll be around then. So
thanks.
Great, thanks. So we got enough people. Let's walk through what we think we must have versus what we can do after it's removed out of experimental. And the first one is alias support, right? And alias support is usually associated with Helm registries, right? Like Helm, Repo, Add, Bitnami, and then you've got the registry and you can use that. But since we're not going to have repositories that you add. Wait, can you add an OCI repository this way? I don't think you can. And so
Yeah, that's
I'm
why
okay.
it's just, we're talking about adding things
And
on
so,
top of features that don't exist.
because it's not a repository, it's a registry. It's a different type of thing. I think I'm okay with this one being worked out the details of for after it comes out of experimental, because we'd have to work out a bunch of details on, do we even go down this road? Does that sound acceptable, Dr. Butcher? All right, perfect.
Can I
The next one-
interject, since we're
Yes.
talking about repository, that reminded me that we did have Luke, who doesn't come to this call every time, add a HIP that he was hoping if we have time to discuss that is about the repository URL. I just dropped it in the chat, but I'm wondering if, since he's here, before we completely go down the rest of that list, we will
Sure.
check that.
I have some time after this if Matt, if you or someone else wants to talk more.
I don't have time after this. So
Okay.
that's part of the reason I was trying to get through these. Although I would suggest that maybe we have a small, okay, I'm looking at the time. We don't have a ton of time. How about this? Can we set up another call either later today or tomorrow to go through some of this? Josh,
Absolutely.
maybe you,
Absolutely.
me, and Dr. Butcher, would you be open to that? And we'll see, and I'll open it up to the other core maintainers and we'll see what we can come out of that.
I'll
Okay.
send a mailing list.
Okay, and I will take the action to try to get with people's schedules to set up something. Okay, sweet. All right, with that in mind, Bridget, you brought up a great point on Luke's thing. So let's jump down to that. Luke, you here?
I am. Thanks.
All right, could you go ahead? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I submitted this HIP. Part of it is selfish, kind of a tool that we're developing, certainly. But I was kind of happy to find that there was an issue that had been around for a couple of years, asking for the same thing that I was looking for. So I did submit a PR first, and Farina, you asked me to open a HIP. So I think at this point, it's less about the implementation, which I would absolutely love feedback on. If it's terrible, I'm happy to hear that. But I think this is more about just getting the HIP moving forward if it's suitable for everyone or if it sounds reasonable. And I appreciate you bringing it up, Bridget, about it is about a repo URL. The way I implemented it currently, it actually supports populating the OCI address. If that's the route we want to go, it's also possible to not include that, but I'm already diverging into implementation when I'd rather talk about the HIP itself. So yeah, kind of just open it up for more eyes, really. I don't have a whole lot else to go on currently.
So
You want to
my first
modify,
go ahead, Josh.
go ahead. Are you're wanting to modify the chart YAML after download?
No, so it's just the release object stored in wherever it gets stored,
Oh,
whether
I
it's
see,
a secret or a config map. Yeah, so it feels low risk, but I'm also new here, so tell me if I'm wrong.
Matt, you may know this. Well, we do strict decoding of YAML objects in some places. Do we do that with the release object because it's under our full control? Do you remember?
That I do not remember off the top of my head if we do that with
Okay.
the release object. That would
Yeah,
that
would
been
negate
easy
it.
for us to do, but we might have done it.
Yeah, if we didn't do that, it would be possible to add new fields here. If we did do that, then we might run into, well, maybe not. I'll have to look at the technical implementation. I'm okay with recording this in the release object. The two things that come to mind for me is you talk about the digest, right? And I'd probably ask for a change name, but when I look at the digest, one of the problems we have is we don't reproducibly build our tar archives right now. There is an open issue or an open pull request about it that needs to be finished off, but we don't do that today. And so that's a problem here, is where that digest could regularly change if you rebuilt it. Now, of course, if you pushed it to a location, but there's actually certain build tool chains where they go through and they rebuild every one of their charts, and their index.yaml for the same version has their digest change all the time. It's kind of a known problem. And so I can see how that circles back to this with the digest. And how do we want to handle that kind of thing? And then there's the internal issue we'd have to deal with. I'm generally in favor of this. And if it's on the release object, it's not something, it's something that would work cross-platform. I started to look into whether our SQL database and things like that would be able to hold it, and those just store the release object. So that would be fine to alter it here as long as everything else lines up. So I think I'm generally okay with this right now myself, though I have to look into the details and point out some of the other things that need to be solved along the way. What do you think about this, Dr. Butcher?
I second that. This was one of the issues that Trail of Bits had flagged that they would like to see us do better in their security audit last year, was checking the hashes. So my reading of it didn't entail that anything had to enforce that if the SHA didn't match, something bad would happen. So that part, right? I mean, we could potentially put this behind a feature flag or things like that if we implement a check in the Helm client. Which we'd want to do. So the only question for me is, will it break the API on the release object? And so breaking would really, in this case, be defined as, if we're doing the strict checking, then a release cut with a Helm client that had these fields would break an older version of the Helm client. So that's the only one. Otherwise, I'm in general in support of this, and even recognizing that this means build processes will have to take on the burden of regenerating tarballs in a reproducible way if they really want to make use of this feature.
Yeah. So the part that I added about the tarball digest was today, after actually talking to, Sergio. I think, Farina, you work with the Artifact Hub, because this is part of my selfish reasoning for this, is an interaction with a third-party tool I'm working on with Artifact Hub too. So the digest part was not something I originally thought about for this until today. So if that's out of scope, we could maybe make it something else.
Oh, I would really love the ability to do digest checking and have reproducible digests. It's on one of my personal to-do lists here. And so I like this. I just want to figure out, how do we work it in? And so the other thing that I know the pull request that implemented some of this failed to do was because every time you do an upgrade, you could actually fork the chart, put it in a new location, and then do something with it. We need to figure out how to make sure we don't just take the old data, copy it over, but pull in the new location if there is a new location for the chart. We've got to do some smart things there.
I did modify my PR afterwards, and I think that should be covered now. But again, if it's okay to keep working on implementation, we can talk more about implementation. But I think I just would at this point need a HIP number or whatever.
So I'll take an action to review this. It may not be till tomorrow, but it's on my to-do list, and I like this.
Great, thank you.
All right. We are at time, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you all online, and have a great day, y'all.
Bye,
Everyone.